Everyone, I'm Bernie. I'm a junior in the School of Foreign Service at Georgetown University, and I will be co-moderating with Al.
Hi, everyone. My name is Al, pronouns he, him, his. I am also a junior in the SFS, and I will also be moderating this event for y'all. We have a set of discussion questions for everybody, but before we get to these discussion questions, we would just like to ask everyone to please introduce yourselves, tell us about your experiences and where you are and like your position as of now, and just feel free to talk about whatever you would want and how to introduce yourselves.
Anybody? I'll go. Schuyler, go ahead.
You got it.
I was gonna make you go. Hi, I'm Layshia Clarendon. You said we could say all the things. I use all pronouns. I do not like one over the other or prefer any other ones. I really like people to use every single one and interchange all of them. I am a point guard for the New York Liberty. I've just finished my 8th season last year in the WNBA. I'm an advocate, and I'm trying to think of all the words and all the things at this point. An activist. I do a little bit of writing, a little bit of organizing. I most recently had top surgery and put my boobs all over the internet. And so hopefully you all have seen those awesome pics. And yeah, I'm living my best life as a new parent, fighting the good fight. I mean, coming into the WNBA in 2013 is when I was drafted. I went to UC Berkeley, grew up in San Bernardino, California. I'm a total West Coast kid, although I've always played for literally every East Coast team in the WNBA. I don't know why, it's just meant to be. So I currently am with the Liberty. When I came into the league, having gone from college to the professional ranks, like in my college experience, particularly 7 years ago or 8 years ago now in 2013, there wasn't this like national conversation that you recently saw around the NCAA or around like women's empowerment or like college athletes really speaking up. I feel like we were just like touching the surface of that. And I wanted to make like Pride March, like LGBT Awareness Month. Long story short, didn't work out. So I just painted a rainbow on my shoe. Like me and my teammate were like, fine, we'll just fight the power by ourselves. And that was kind of like my origin story for realizing like I could use basketball for more. And having gotten my story like kind of, squashed essentially by like I don't want to say an unsupportive coach, but a coach that was like, we need to just focus on basketball. Let's not get too much into like all this queer stuff, although they were like a pretty accepting coach of like our identities and like who we dated. That was kind of my origin story for realizing like, okay, like I have more power than I realize in sports, particularly as an athlete. And particularly as like always being one of the best players on the team. So when I got drafted in 2013, I was like, oh, like y'all gonna get this Twitter thread, like all these tweets, you're gonna get all the things I have to say now about like activism and speaking out. And so the difference for me was like going from college to pro to realizing like I am my own individual brand now. Like I can talk about what I want, I can say the things that I want. So obviously you're seeing a lot of college athletes do that now, or we just kind of weren't in that position to do that. And so ever since I got into the league in 2013, I was like, I'm going to be super outspoken about everything I possibly can be. And fast forward to now, most recently we negotiated like a new collective bargaining agreement for the WNBA. We did a lot of work this summer around social justice and like the Say Her Name campaign. And so I'm always just trying to fight the power, shake things up as best as I possibly can, educate people along the way, and really just like make the world a lot better than it is right now. Pass it to Schuyler.
Sure, thanks, Layshia. I'm Schuyler. I use he, him pronouns. I'm 24 years old. I currently live in DC or native Anacostan land. I am a swimmer. I learned how to swim when I learned how to walk, so I've been swimming my entire life, although for the past couple of years I have not. I stopped swimming at the end of my college career in 2019, so I've been out of the water for a couple of years now. But I'm the first trans athlete to compete for a Division I men's team in college, and that's sort of my platform that I stand on these days. But I've been doing DEI consulting work and speaking for about 6 years now since I started in college, and that's the majority of my work, and that's what I do a lot of the time these days. I also do a lot of work on Instagram, and I call it kind of transliteracy, if you will, kind of teaching about how we talk about trans people, how we talk about gender and gender expansive identities. And then I also am a life coach. I also am an author, and my book is coming out this fall, which I'm really excited about, which is about a trans athlete as well. But it's a fiction novel, so it's not about me. Yeah, do a lot of random things, kind of like Layshia is saying. I think a lot of us do lots of different things in this space. And yeah, I don't know what else to share, but that's sort of the whatever 1 minute speech about myself. But yeah, Erica.
Wow, how do I follow that? My name's Erica. I go by she, her pronouns. I am the starting quarterback for the Oregon Hawks women's tackle football team. I live here in Eugene, Oregon. And let's see, this is my 4th season with the Hawks. Last year, our season was taken because of COVID, but we were still practicing up to a certain point, so I still consider it a season. My passion is definitely doing more and more things like this and trying to do what I can to be an activist. My platform was given to me by Athlete Ally. I serve as a player ambassador for Athlete Ally, and I'm very proud of that, as well as being able to do some other things. I'm a graduate of Oregon State University, and I work as a banker, my day job. And let's see, I think that's pretty much it for now. I'm very, very excited to be here with these amazing athletes on this panel.
All right, well, thank you for y'all for introducing yourselves. So our first question is pretty broad. You can kind of take it in any direction you'd like, but what has your experiences with coming out to coaches, teammates, and other players been like? And have people been supportive or antagonistic in any way?
Do we go in a certain order, or we just talk?
Oh, anyone who wants to
Okay.
take it away.
Okay. I can start. My experience as far as coming out, my first season when I started playing was with the same organization. It was actually a different brand name, the Eugene Lady Hawks, and we played in a different league that's now defunct, but it was the IWFL. And their policy at the time was that trans women could play. There were certain, things that I had to go through to be able to do it. But basically, as soon as I found out where we were going to play and what those expectations were, then I approached my coach and explained, that I was a transgender woman, that, based on the policy requirements, I was able to compete. And then he was very supportive, actually. Just wanted to make sure that, obviously we went through the league and followed the requirements and things like that. So of course I went through that. There was a little bit of frustration at times because I had to keep verifying a couple of things, but they were also kind of new when it came to dealing with trans athletes. So that experience was the first time. And then, unfortunately, I've been on a team that's had a different coach almost every year. I won't go to the reasons why about that, but honestly, with the coaches, I haven't had any issues so far. And for the most part, the real only big issues I've had is, teammates that I used to play with leaving the team and then hearing things after they played with me. Most of the time, my teammates have been very supportive. Ownership's been very supportive. And, those, the ones that are gone, like, it is what it is. If you didn't have the courage or the strength to say things to my face, then, that to me, that really tells me more about who you are as an individual. And I try to take those experiences and really just focus on the people that are there, and I have to say, especially this year, we've had quite a bit of turnover, and we have a lot of new girls, and they've just been absolutely incredible. And it's one of the main reasons that I stay with this organization when I've had opportunities to go to teams that play in different leagues and might even be playing on a bigger stage. But I'm all about loyalty. I love the Oregon Hawks, and for the most part, that organization has been really, really good to me.
I'm curious if I can jump in and play moderator as well. I have a question about, have you had other teams like challenge your gender identity or your ability to play? And like, if so, how have you been protected in the policies for engaging in your sport? I feel like that's the connection between a lot of the trans bills that are going on right now.
Right. There was a situation a couple years ago. We played in a different league. I never got specifics of who was questioning it, but some of the teams, I guess, had questions about whether I actually met the qualifications. So that was in the WFA, and the WFA has a policy that's very similar to the NCAA and the U.S. Olympic Committee, as far as what you have to meet requirements to participate. And you volunteered it earlier. I'll say it too. I'm not shy about saying I've been through surgery and everything else, and I've been on hormones for several years. So, like in most cases, any of these policies that they throw at me, I already know that all I have to do is produce this letter. But ultimately, I think that number one, my ownership has been very protective of me. So, like, to give you exact specifics of who said it, who did it, that's why I don't know. I'm just very lucky to have them, and would not hesitate to speak up if I had to, but they kind of handle it on a case-by-case basis. I'm very critical in some cases of how the WFA treats transgender athletes in other situations, but we're not there anymore. So yeah, for the most part, that was really the only bad experience I had, Layshia.
I can speak on that. I think that I would say the majority of negative experiences or negative feedback I've gotten about my experience as a trans athlete has usually been online. I think online is the probably the biggest place that trolls feel emboldened behind a keyboard, right? And I will say that that's a daily occurrence. Whether or not it's attacking my transness with regards to sports, it's another story. But attacking transness is a common thing to do online. And there's kind of a couple ways to deal with it. The first thing is not to read the comments. In a lot of places, I don't read comments. I don't go and search for articles and read the comments on them. I don't go on Facebook on something that somebody else posts about me and read the comments there. I don't Google myself and read those comments. And I would imagine that both of you also probably don't do that, because it's not really like healthy for us, right? So boundaries with where I am interacting online is really important with regards to that. But in terms of
Do we lose Schuyler?
sort of, I stole a spot and all this kind of stuff. And I didn't talk a lot about it, actually at all about it during the time that I was on team, because I didn't feel like bringing attention to it at the time. But since then I felt more open about it. And what I did at the time was, it was just sort of twofold. At first, when I heard about all these things that this person was saying about me, I was devastated. I remember feeling really, really sad and upset, and kind of like broken almost in those moments. But I took a pause, and I really, this sounds like a crazy person, but I went back to my room. I left the situation where I was hearing these things, and they weren't actually being told from this person. It was like a messenger that was sharing this with me, essentially. I went back to my room, really, really upset. I put a big piece of paper, one of those poster boards, on the wall, and I wrote over and over again, "His words do not define me." Over and over again, his words do not define me. And again, I might have sounded like a crazy person, looked like a crazy person, but the point was, I was trying to remind myself that just because other people have an opinion of me doesn't mean that it's true, doesn't mean that I need to believe them, and definitely does not mean I need to internalize them. And I ended up, this person swam the same events as me, and I ended up just being quiet and like kind of sort of muddling through it as much as I could. I didn't feel like it needed attention. And so the first year he beat me in all my races. And the next year I beat him in all the races. And the next year I beat him in all the races. And the last year I beat him in all the races. And after that, he shut up. And that was my quiet way of saying I'm here and I belong here, because after that, he could no longer say that I didn't belong there. And the point isn't necessarily that you need to beat all the people that you're competing against who say negative things about you. It's to focus on why you're there. So when he said these negative things, I first reminded myself that those don't define me. And second, I said, why am I here? Am I here to prove to this person that I am man enough? Am I here to prove that I am trans enough? Am I here to prove anything to this person? No. My swimming has nothing to do with this person. My swimming is all about me being here to swim. I'm here to swim, and that's it. And I think that's something for all of us to remind ourselves in sport. What are we here for? We're not here to prove to other people that we are man enough. We might be wanting to prove a bigger picture of something. And my journey absolutely has included proving that trans athletes are possible, right? That trans men can compete and beat cis men. But that's not the point when I get into the pool. When I dive off the blocks, the point is to swim. And that was something I had to remind myself of when I was interacting with this kind of transphobia and hatred. And it turned out in a good way. But even if I hadn't beaten him, I still would have won, because I would have been able to do what I wanted to do at the pool and not let his words pull me away from that.
I mean, I was like, mic drop on the like, I beat him again and again and again. Shout out to you. So I've had, I mean, similar to Schuyler in terms of like the internet, obviously everything from like TERFs to people who are ruining my unverified mentions, frankly. And I like to engage with unverified people. I'm not like an elitist, like bougie online person who only checks my verified mentions. And so that's one of the most annoying things, is when like I can't even go in my unverified comments to get on Twitter anymore, because like they're just so flooded with people having these gross, disgusting conversations that I like refuse to read and engage in. Similarly to like why I stopped watching videos of Black people being murdered, because I'm like, yeah, I pretty much know how the story ends. I don't need to like watch it and digest it. But in terms of like coaches and teammates, so most recently like came out as like trans and non-binary, I guess, in terms of like having surgery, which is a little bit annoying because I was saying that this is who I was before this, but there in some ways, particularly the cis world, like didn't really validate my transness until I like had surgery and then posted that. And it was like, there's a trans athlete in the W. And I'm like, girl, like I've been telling y'all this for a cool minute now. Like I had been using different pronouns. So that's kind of one of the annoying ways that like trans people have to navigate like the cis heteronormative world of like us, if we look for that validation there, or even like how we move through the world of like it not being us seen as like trans enough until we like have a surgery or fully transition or be on hormones. And so in that way, being more recently coming out as trans in terms of my surgery, I've had really good experiences besides the internet trolls. Like the league has been really supportive. I did to do a lot of labor, which I think is something that is interesting to point out, because getting like the league on board, the players union, and then ultimately like my team, I had to have like a lot of conversations behind the scenes leading up to like when I wanted to share about my top surgery news. Like I knew from the very beginning I wanted to share, because it was like something I didn't want to feel like for my journey, like I had to hide or feel shameful about or not tell. So I'm pretty like, I don't tell all my business online, but like I share a lot online. And so I knew like, oh yeah, I don't like when I'm at the pool one day, like y'all are going to see what you see and I'm excited and I don't want to feel like bad or shameful or like that's just not something that's put kind of out there in a way that like I get to tell my own story. But in doing that, like the amount of conversations and labor I had to do behind the scenes constantly to get to the point where I was comfortable with like sharing the news, that was a lot and really exhausting, like talking to the commissioner, talking to our players, our player executive director for our union. And so there was just a lot of like emotional labor that goes along with that. But in terms of individual experiences and players, it's been pretty good. Like it hasn't gone back to my ears yet. I'm sure people talk, but in terms of our union has done a good job. Like we did a training, I wasn't on it. I didn't want to be on it because I was like, people should feel free to ask questions without like me being there. If people are asking like questions that they're not sure like how to engage with them. So I wasn't on it, but we did a training right after, maybe a few weeks after. And this was timing was intentional that my story had come out. That was like a gender training and like our league needs to be prepared to move forward. And so in that way, the structure of our league is really cool because it was something like we knew with our union, it couldn't just be like Layshia tells a story and then like players in the W are like so can they play now? Like, what does this mean? And there's no like direction, there's no education, there's no like really healthy conversations being had about it, because people have questions, right? Like, we live in a very binary world. It's normal to have questions. It's okay to ask questions, obviously with respect, with humility and all of that. And so I think the W has done a really good job of like, in particular the union, of like trying to put things in place to be proactive and not only just like tell a story and then not have anything come behind it. And so I've been really, really fortunate to have some positive experiences. And I was really nervous, like, particularly for your colleagues, like Schuyler saying, like the guy who was beating you, like, it's really scary when you put yourself out there. Like, my biggest fear was like, okay, what if now I come out about my top surgery and then like teammates or people in the league are like blasting me online or saying like, now she doesn't belong here. Like, he can't play in our league, and feeling like you get put on an island and kind of blasted out into the world, where it's very much like your livelihood, right? And like my career. And so I've been really lucky and have some really good experiences.
All right, thank you all for sharing about your experiences. We greatly appreciate them. We're going to move on to the next question. Recently, as most of us know already, a number of states have introduced a variety of anti-trans bills designed to keep transgender people out of sports, most notably bills that have passed into law this year in South Dakota, Tennessee, Arkansas, and Mississippi. What impact can we see these political attacks on trans athletes' ability to play and their overall well-being? And if I don't mind, like, Schuyler, would you like to have the first back at it?
Yeah, sure. Well, so I could go on for probably hours about this. I'm going to try to condense it as much as possible. The first thing to recognize about these anti-trans bills, first of all, there's over at least 44 of them going around the country right now. We just saw one from Arkansas go through the House, the Senate, get vetoed by the governor, and then overturned by both the House and the Senate, which is devastating, right? Because even the governor was able to say this isn't it, and he's a Republican governor, and the state said, nope, we actually do really want to ban healthcare for trans kids. So there's a lot there. I will drop this link in while I'm talking, as there's information about all the bills, plus information about responding to the bills there if you want to sort of learn more, and also what I'm about to say. The first thing to recognize about these bills is they're a coordinated attack on trans youth, right? This is not just people being like, we just all suddenly together don't like trans people. This is coordinated. The people are thinking about this. This is designed this way. All the money, if you talk to Chase Strangio, who is the ACLU attorney lead on this, he's transgender as well. He'll tell you that all of the money that was supposed to be going to marriage equality, fighting marriage equality, right, is now being dumped here. Why is this significant? This is not a new issue. It's not like, oh, therefore trans people are now this new brand new. No, we've been around, we've been here, we've been fine. And now we're using all this money. We Republicans are using all this money to now attack us, right, to repurpose it, because it's a way to police people. It is an expression of the patriarchy, and it is an expression of white supremacy. And people are like, whoa, race, what? How is this part of race? It is absolutely part of race, because it negatively impacts, most specifically, lots of Black and brown people, specifically Black and brown trans women. There's already discrepancy of healthcare to Black and brown folks. And if you increase that for trans people, it's going to negatively, disproportionately impact Black and brown trans people specifically. So there's a lot there. Sports are another big part of these bills, right? So over half the bills are anti-trans sports bills. And why is this significant? These are also mostly attacking trans girls, and specifically with a lens of white supremacy and patriarchy, of policing Black and brown women's bodies in sports. Right? It's about the policing of women's bodies in sport. And I think that we often miss that. And it is all done under these sort of fear-mongering guise of either fairness and protecting women's sport, and or, so for the other side, for the healthcare bills, that's all about like, we like don't want children to like mutilate themselves or whatever, which is not even what the bills are usually about, because surgery doesn't happen for trans youth most of the time. Anyways, it's mostly about puberty blockers, which are harmless. So there's a lot that's going on here, and I'm happy to break down any of it. But specifically with the anti-trans sports bills, I think it's really important to recognize that most often these conversations about, quote, protecting women's sport by excluding trans athletes, specifically trans women, actually backfire quite a bit, right? Because in order to exclude trans women, you have to know which women are trans. And in order to do that, you have to test them. And in order to test them, you either have to test everybody, right? In order to be fair, you have to test everybody, or you have to do something called accusation-based testing, which is I accuse you of being trans, then you are tested. Most states are proposing the latter because it's financially and logistically impossible to test everybody. So then we're doing it based on accusation-based testing, right? So that says, okay, so I'm going to accuse this woman over here of being transgender. What happens here? Not only do we then, exclude trans women, and that's a huge part of it, but we demonize transness because now it's the worst thing that you can be called. And by doing so, we say, at what point is a girl too good to be considered trans, right? At what point is a girl too masculine or too non-conforming to whatever femininity, standards look like to then be accused of being trans? So we're using transness by demonizing it to then police women's bodies as either too good or too masculine. So they're being accused of being trans. That policing, right, that exclusion, that's what's going to help destroy the fabric of women's sport, not the inclusion of trans women. More on that on the link, but that's the short of it.
I could hear you talk about that all day. You laid it out like so well and eloquent and clear and nailed like the two sides of the bill. So, I mean, we can add some to that, but he pretty much like, I'll just add like trans people aren't dominating sports. Like I hope we are one day, and I plan on it. And to like see us at the Olympics, just like with our trans flag, not our American flag, like stomping on people. But there's also the narrative, like I think so many folks don't even realize like there's not like there's a case happening of a girl dominating the sport, and then it like gets to like people are doing these bills when there aren't even trans kids like on their team or in their community that they know of. And so even if there were, that wouldn't be justified, but it's being done all in the name of everything Schuyler mentioned. And I think the well-being part is so hard to like untangle from your mental, and the attack of like, it's been really hard for me to like follow them in detail because of the drain and the stress and the weight of like hearing your existence be debated. Basically, like there was someone who did, it was like WNBA Insider or some Twitter handle that I think maybe a former player runs, and they put a poll up one of these days. It was like, should transgender women be able to play sports? And I was like we're really doing a poll about this? Like the fact that our existence is being like debated, like and it's particularly as a Black person, like the relations between race and gender that like a lot of people aren't connecting the dots on, of like, hello, should Black people be able to drink out our water fountains? Like, hello, like we're not seeing the ways that these like oppressions intersect. And so particularly to see, maybe Black people or people who are marginalized, like also recreate it. It's predominantly been a lot of white folks and white Republicans who are doing this work, but to connect the race and gender aspect of it, I think is a really big point that a lot of people are missing, and we just don't do a good job of.
One of the parts that's really, really frustrating for me, just to piggyback that, is as I've watched all of this happen, and I'm sure you both have seen it too, if you've watched any of the video of these parents that are sitting there pleading with these legislative, I'm going to say it, they're idiots, flat out, sitting there pleading with them about how what they're doing is going to result in suicides, and their kids basically going from being all happy about, this is me, I'm excited, this is my life, and now they're shoving them back in the closet, or they're putting them back in a position. You had a doctor, I believe it might have been in Arkansas, I'm not 100% sure, that sat there and said, I have trans kids in the ER room that have tried to kill themselves just because you guys are passing these laws. You're talking about passing these laws. And it's so frustrating for me that people don't understand, like what Schuyler said, this is just not an issue. It's like every time they ask them to provide proof, who's the athlete in Arkansas that's dominating trans, as a trans person, trans woman, dominating sports here? Every single one of these states, and all they do is they go and point out those, the athletes in, I believe it's in New Hampshire, so somewhere in the East Coast, one situation. What is it? Connecticut. Thank you. I'm so sorry. I'm getting a little nervous here. But
don't worry.
But basically that particular experience, and it's like they get so focused on it, and they're just like, but this, and this. And what they never point out is, well, yes, they won some races. They also lost. And it's like, I think from my standpoint, for the longest time in talking about this, I've been very hesitant to get like fired up and say the same thing that Layshia was saying about dominate. But I did a podcast the other day and I told the guy that was asking the questions, I'm coming for it this year. Like, seriously, what, you're going to let us play until we're good? That doesn't make any sense. And that's the frustrating part about this. This is not about sports. It's not about us dominating, because we're not dominating. It's strictly about what you said. And it's so frustrating that so many people will not stop to listen to that. And that's where I go from that.
Here, I want to add on to that. I think that's like such a spot on point. Like they'll let us play until we're good. There will always be good athletes. There will always be good athletes, and sometimes they're going to be trans, right? And the reality is that we are vastly underrepresented in any elite level sport anywhere. We have currently one person that is open and out on Team USA. That's Chris Mosier. We have literally zero Olympians. Trans people have been allowed to play in the Olympics for the past 2 Olympics. 0 Olympians. If we were well represented, or let's just say equally represented, we would have thousands of both men and women in the Olympics, but we don't. We have 0. So the other thing that people like totally miss, you're right, is that we're not actually being represented because of the amount of discrimination. But if we were, it's not because we're being unfair. It's because we're accurately represented in sport, because the equal access is there. The thing I always like to also add about this conversation, and since we're sitting about trans athletes specifically, I'm going to dive into this. People's bodies are different, always. That's how sports work. And one of the most common arguments against trans women in sport is, oh, well, she has a biological advantage because whatever. And let's say they can list lots of different things, whether that be height, bone density, hand size, whatever it is, doesn't matter. Listen, if somebody's 6'3", I cannot tell you that they are not, right? But Layshia, you can probably confirm this. There are plenty of cisgender women who are 6'3" and taller. And guess what? They're great at basketball. But when we see a 6'3" woman who's great at basketball, what do we say? Wow, she's made for basketball, right? We put a trans woman there, let's say she's 6 foot. You don't have to be 6'3", 6 foot. People immediately say that's unfair. What is that actually? It is transphobic, it is homophobic, it is misogynistic, and is most often racist. Because the two girls we're talking about, Erica, are 2 Black trans girls from Connecticut being attacked by a white cis girl. There is no coincidence that these are race separated, right? That one is white and both the other girls are Black. It is no coincidence. This is also misogynistic about the masculinization of Black women, the policing of Black women in sports. And this is not new. We've seen this with Serena Williams. We've seen it with Caster Semenya. We've seen this with plenty of other people. And you can Google that in 2 seconds. I don't need to explain that all to you, right? To you listeners, Erica, I know you know that already. But anyways, my point is this is like a bigger thing. And when we start getting into it, it's not actually about bodies. It's about this bigotry, because bodies are different. And that is how sports work. If bodies were all exactly the same and we use them all the same, what are we doing? We're all pressing flooring it on our cars going nowhere, right? So I think that people forget that, and how steeped in intersectional discrimination that's happening, right? So let me give you an example, and I know this is taking a little bit of time, but I think this is really important for folks listening. You all have heard of Michael Phelps, right? Winningest Olympian of all time. Michael Phelps, his body is made for swimming. I don't know what happened to him in utero, but he is made for swimming. He has the perfect arm length, the perfect proportions, and guess what? His body produces half the amount of lactic acid the average typical athlete does. Lactic acid is the thing in your muscles that makes it hurt. So when you stop running or swimming because you're like, ow, I can't do this anymore, that's the lactic acid. What would happen if your body produces half the amount that the normal athlete does? Would you be better at sports? Maybe win all of your races in the last 5 yards? When does Michael Phelps win all of his races? Is that a biological advantage? Absolutely. Is it unfair? No. When the IOC tested him, they praised him as a genetically superior specimen. Those were their words, genetically superior specimen. Okay, let's put him over there for a second. We bring in Caster Semenya. Caster Semenya is a Black queer runner from South Africa. somebody accused her of being intersex or of being manly or whatever it was. So they actually tested her. This was a very big thing about how it was unfair that they even tested her because it's a huge invasion of her privacy. They did that. They did not release the results. So we actually don't know what's going on in her body. But what happened after she was tested, we assume that she was found to be some kind of intersex. And she was not only stripped of her medals, but also barred from competition further until she artificially lowers her testosterone levels. Okay, let's bring Michael Phelps back in. We got a white cis straight man who, when they find he has a biological advantage, they not only they praise him as a genetically superior specimen and they leave him be. He's fine. He can compete as much as he wants. We have a black queer woman, and not only does she have her medals removed, but she's barred from competition. This is not a coincidence, right? This is about the white cishet patriarchy and the policing of black queer women's bodies, or just black women's bodies in general, or women's bodies in general, but it goes down worse and worse and worse as you get into these marginalized identities. Okay, Castor is not even trans, and it's really, really important to remember that too. Castor is not trans. She is assigned female at birth. She is a cisgender woman. We don't know anything else about her body in conclusiveness because they can't share that. She's not a trans woman who's taking hormones, right, or shifting her hormones in any way. Her body naturally produces that the same way that Michael Phelps' body naturally produces half the amount of lactic acid. There will always be biological advantages in sports, but that's how sports work. So I think it's also really important to recognize that. And the last thing I'm going to add is most of these bills are not talking about elite sports. We are not talking about the Olympics. We are not talking about the NCAA. We're not even talking about regional competitions. We are talking about when kids want to play soccer with their friends in high school and kick a ball around, because all the other elite level sports, as soon as you have to qualify for anything, they already have rules and regulations about hormones, because you can't just waltz onto a team in the NCAA, as Erica was saying, or in any professional level sport that allows trans women. You can't just waltz on. You have to go through hormone treatment. And they already have that at elite levels. But for kids, we don't need that because they're just kids, right? And for most kids, especially below the age of 13, there aren't even any biological differences to speak of that are significant in sport because they're children. And before puberty, before Tanner stage 2 of puberty, you can go Google that too, there are no biological differences except for the presence or absence of a penis, which does not have an impact on your sports. The end. Well, the beginning, there's lots more.
Well, I just wanted to add to that. Oh my gosh, and now I think I totally forgot about it. Well, you were talking about biology with the kids, and I think, oh yeah, this was my point. The thing that's really like been weighing on my head is that I feel like in a way, in some cases, they're systematically trying to wipe us out. Because think about it. If you stop these kids from using blockers, okay, and then they are not allowed to do any medical transitioning, should they choose to do any sort of medical transitioning until they are adults, 18, so they've gone through full puberty of whatever they didn't want to go through. And so they're already struggling with that, and then you put them through that. There's no way these athletes are going to be elite, okay? There's no way. And there's really no way, like the way that they're setting up the world, it's just so frustrating, because you're right. Like for me, it's like, this doesn't affect me. I play in a league, I get to play, my team supports me, that sort of thing. And it's not even about that. It's about the future. It's about the kids. And it's so frustrating because, like you said, they're making a problem out of something that is not a problem. And so many people won't stop and think about why they're doing it. And that's why it's important for us to do exactly what you're doing and tell them why they're doing it.
If you want to read more about how that's a coordinated attack, I just dropped another link, which is by the ACLU, which is where Chase Strangio works, and they're sort of the primary legal defense of trans folks. And I'd encourage you to look on that, because what Erica's saying is huge. Like this isn't an accident, right? It is coordinated. It is thought through. It's let's stop it at the source and let's make sure that we destroy trans people from many different ways. And it's devastating. Right. You also can take action. So I'll put the link in again, but if you, right now every single person can call their US senator, and if you're from the US, and tell them to vote for the Equality Act, because that will cut a lot of these bills off at the knee as well. Because if the Equality Act updates the 1964 Civil Rights Act to include gender identity and sexuality. So that basically means that it will be federally illegal for you to discriminate based on gender identity. And all of these bills are predicated on that, on discriminating based on gender identity.
Thank you all. Thank you all so much for speaking so well on that topic. And kind of going off of that, we have another question that is, given the majority of the debate on trans athletes' ability to play is dominated by cisgender politicians and conservative media, how can trans people, in particular trans athletes, assert themselves into this debate and respond to these anti-trans arguments? I don't want to put anyone on the spot, but if Layshia, if you would like to begin, if not, someone else can. But just how can trans athletes assert themselves?
How can trans athletes insert themselves and respond to the debates? Well, one, I mean, I don't want to tell anyone to come out and insert themselves in a space that's like not safe, that's not healthy, that's going to put them under like unnecessary attack. So from experience, obviously having worked from the inside out, if you have the power or the privilege to do that, and make sure you have support and community around you, I think that's really important because, you know, if you put yourself in a situation where you come out and talk about this, assert yourself, and then you're not supported and you potentially like lose your livelihood, your home, you know, your ability to play sport. So I'd say all those factors, first and foremost, I think are really, really important because for trans people, like visibility oftentimes leads to more violence. It leads to like, I don't want to say worse things than if we weren't visible, but there's this like duality that comes with visibility that I think is really difficult to navigate. And then in terms of the debates, I mean, I don't think we owe anyone like shit to respond to. I don't know if we can curse on this crap. In terms of responding to that debate, because so often, it sucks. It feels like we're on the defense and we have to like have a retort for every reason. We have to give the like Harvard grad, like Schuyler, like the breakdown of intersectionality and like systematic racism and how they're all connected and white supremacy to like prove our worthiness and our ability to like live and survive. And so in terms of that, I don't think we owe anyone anything but the ability to like be alive and thrive and grow and be healthy and whole individual people. And so it's hard because I even have friends that like ask me, or people who are like, so when someone says like it's unfair, like what do I say? And I'm like, oh, okay, here we go again, like that we should have dignity and ability to be alive, but there is always this kind of this narrative that like we're on the defense. And again, to connect it to race, it's like the parallels that I just over and over again when I think about white people saying like, well, just keep your hands up where people can see when you get pulled over, like just don't commit a crime, don't speed, don't ever not put your blinker on when you turn, don't be asleep in your bed like Breonna Taylor, like don't do these things and you won't experience this violence or this hate or these things that will like try and erase you when that's really just what a lot of people are trying to do. So I'll pass it to Eric and Schuyler. That's like my 2 cents on it.
I'm going to agree with you. As I mentioned earlier before, I did a podcast this last week, and it was a podcast. It's pretty well known in the women's football group, Gridiron Girls, and the host of the podcast had sent me like, because I wanted to know ahead of time. This was the second time I'd been on the podcast, and I wanted to know what I was about to get hit with, because honestly, it was like, okay, so there's all these trans bills, and now he's asking me to be on the program again. And so what I did was I got out in front of their questions before they even had a chance. I was fully prepared to do exactly what I said earlier. I came out guns blazing. I was like, you know what? This is what this is. This is why they're doing it. What's frustrating to me, and I will scream it at the top of my lungs when it comes to women's tackle football, there are policies that allow us to play. They do not protect us. When you have players that are being called men on a football field, having their face mask ripped off, being punched, being like just in all sorts of ways, and you do nothing in support of those athletes, you have a policy that allows trans athletes to participate, yet you're silent when it comes to whether or not you are going to speak out on behalf of these trans kids that are the future of what could potentially be your players. That irritated me. And so I went out guns blazing. But it's like what you said, I already know that I have my support system with my ownership, my friends, with Athlete Ally, with everybody else that I've met. So if someone comes after me, you know what? whatever. If it's speaking on behalf of making the world a better place for kids, then I'll put myself in that line of fire. And if it, me being willing to talk about these things makes it easier for the people that come after me, because, like I said earlier, I don't know how many more years I'm going to do this, then it's worth it. But I agree with you. Should everybody have to do that? No. There are certain ones that want to, that are willing to, and have taken the steps to know that they're supported when they do it. And I agree with that 100%.
Yeah, I'm thinking a lot, Layshia, about what you just said about like we don't owe anybody anything, and I'm gonna add a little tweak to that. I agree with you totally. I think we don't owe anybody anything except ourselves. We owe ourselves our own peace, and I think that that's something I struggle with a lot. Kind of like when I hold both of what you all are saying of like we don't owe anybody anything. We owe ourselves our peace, but also we have kids that we're trying to fight for. And how do we hold both? How do we hold the fact that these kids are being attacked, that we have the privilege of emotional grounding, of support systems, of being adults, right? Not of being stuck under a roof with parents who might not support us, or with coaches, or whoever might not support us. We have a privilege to be able to say something. And I struggle personally, and this is, my transparency, my vulnerability here. Like I struggle with holding both, of having the privilege of that emotional grounding, of the ability to articulate my thoughts, and of my education, of my background, right, to be able to say, hey, this is what's going on, and be able to convince people, while also needing to protect my own energy, right? And it's a difficult place to be in, I think, for me personally. I know probably for you too as well, and for anybody who's in this advocacy space. But what I will say, if you are a trans athlete and you're trying to figure out how to advocate for yourself, I think that recognizing that advocating for yourself can mean self-care, right? Advocating for yourself can mean taking a break. Advocating for yourself should mean taking a step back, turning off your phone, not reading the bills, right? If you are a trans athlete, and this is what I did for the first 5 years of my experience in this space, I didn't read a single bill. Up until a year ago, I didn't read a single bill. I didn't read a single article online. I didn't spend a single moment looking at legislation. Now, there was less then, so there was a part of that was availability. There's more of this now, but I also just didn't have the bandwidth. I didn't know what to say. I hadn't formulated the arguments that I had today, that I'm sharing with you all today. I have them now, and they sound eloquent and they sound put together because I've done this every single day for the past like 3 months now, but they weren't there before. And so when people ask me, I said, listen, what I know is that trans women competing is fair, and that's all I'm going to say. And if you fight with me on that, you're fighting with my identity and my existence, and I don't have time for that. I don't have space for that. I don't have energy for that. And you are allowed to say that. If you want to, and I mean that in its entirety, if you want to provide them with more, send them a link, right? I've written out a link with everything. And Layshia, you're saying, what my friends ask me, like, what do I say when X, Y, and Z? Like when somebody tells me X, Y, and Z, I have a list of all of those common arguments. And if there's one that you can't find on there, tell me, because it's a hole in the argument, and I'll find another thing I can write down for you. But that is a place where when people ask me, people DM me all the time, I literally only reply with the link. I don't even say hi. I just say link. And I have friends that will text me, because I'm like the resident trans person for all my friends, who will text me. Sometimes I don't reply, by the way, let me be really clear. Sometimes I don't reply because I'm sick of people texting me without any kind of hello, hi, how are you? They just send me things to questions. But if I do reply, a lot of times my passive aggressiveness looks like just sending a link. Like I'm not even going to explain, because you could have gone on my website and found it. But my side point, and let me pull away from this little bit of passive aggressiveness, is if you want to educate somebody, use things that are already there. So I've created that resource. If it resonates with you and you like it, just send them the link, and don't get lost in trying to explain it all to them, because A, I've already done it and you don't need to have to do it again. And that's why I created it. So I don't have to do it 5 million times. And B, you don't need to waste your energy on that. And I think, like, going back to what Layshia is saying, like, you really protecting our own energy is fighting for us, right? Protecting our own communities can be done through protecting ourselves.
All right, thank you all for your answers to that question. We're going to go into our final discussion question of the night. So back on support for trans athletes, what are the necessary steps that teammates, coaching staff, athletic departments, or other higher athletic and sports associations should take in order to be more inclusive and supportive of their trans athletes? And since we are...
Make the policy guy go first.
But yeah, I want you to go. I wanted to ask Schuyler just because we're
Yeah,
running low
that's
on your
what
time.
I'm
Yeah.
talking
It's so funny. I'm the policy guy. I used to say I would never do policy. So let's see. Things that teams can do. Number one, I think that people need to get educated. So one of the things that I do in my work is I do DEI consulting and trainings for coaches and teams and that kind of stuff. That's huge. Like I think so. My coach at Harvard had already taken a gender diversity class of some kind, and so he knew trans people. He knew of trans people. He'd already like had some kind of like education about trans people existing. I have never had to correct him on language before, which is incredible. He is a white cis straight man who just happened to have taken this class because he told me, he was like, oh, I thought it would make me a better coach. He said it so like flippantly. It was like, just whatever. I just thought it would make me a better coach. It definitely did. And not just for me, right? It makes him a better coach for everybody. Because guess what? Everybody has a gender experience, whether or not you are agender, cisgender, transgender, genderqueer, whatever, you have either experience of gender or an absence of experience of gender. And both of those are something to do with gender. So coaches having an understanding of gender, I think is really, really important. And it will make everybody a better athlete. And we know this because when people are able to show up as their full selves, they'll do better at their jobs, whatever that job is. And people, the most common pushback I get from teachers and from coaches when I'm giving these trainings is, well, I don't have a trans kid. What does this matter? I'm like, listen, this matters for all of your athletes, first of all. And second of all, they're like, well, I just want my kid. It doesn't fine. If I have a trans kid, that's fine. They can be whoever they are. They just need to be on my team and do their sport. They will do better at that sport. And then you will make more money and you will be better of a coach if you actually are accepting to them and you understand what's going on with them. So it is always beneficial to understand your athletes. It is always beneficial to have an understanding of what's going on for your athletes and for any kind of intersectionality, inclusiveness. So one, trainings for coaches, I think, is huge so that they can have top-down influence, right? Bottom-up influence, right? Having people talk about this on teams, right? Having conversations in teams. I also have done many trainings for athletes as well, student athletes specifically, and that's really valuable for the kids, not me specifically, but anybody talking to kids. And Layshia, I think you've probably done these talks as well, where kids are learning and student athletes are learning so that it can be common culture on a team to not be misogynistic, to not be homophobic, to not be transphobic, etc. And then the last thing, and this is more, I think, generalized, this is anybody can do this, use your pronouns, right? Explain your pronouns when you introduce yourself. Hi, I'm Schuyler. I use he, him pronouns. Really easy. Just add it to the end, even if you're not trans, especially actually if you're not trans. And there's two reasons that we do this. One, when we announce ourselves with our pronouns, introduce ourselves with our pronouns, it helps dismantle this idea that gender expression, how I look, how I present myself, how I act, doesn't always equal gender identity, who I actually am. And there's a couple of reasons why that's true. One, it's subjective. It is a societal construct, how I present myself. So you might think this is masculine, but somebody else might not. Cis people get misgendered too, right? So it helps dismantle this idea that who I am is not always represented accurately or received accurately by how I present myself. The other thing is it makes it a really safe place for gender nonconforming folks, non-binary folks, and trans folks to share our pronouns too. So it's a win-win scenario. So even if you, quote, look like whatever it was you were assigned at birth or your identity, it's still important to share pronouns. And you all can do that right now. It's a very tangible step. Add it to your Zoom handle. Put it in your email your email bio. Put it in your Instagram bio. It's easy to do and should be done now. Coaches should be doing that too.
You nailed a lot of them. I like when I had written down thinking about this question, I thought about like policy, culture, and celebrating us. And so obviously policy is always a big one. The more you can create, add gender identity, add all the words to your policies, make sure they're known for people too. Like how often do we go through the world and know, like when I was at Cal, they just actually created a policy that I think included gender identity and trans folks in their like non-discrimination, whatever on the athletic department. I don't know all the language, but when I was at Cal, it's like, I don't even think I was aware of like our racial policy or like our policy that protected queer people. Like I didn't really engage a lot with like the queer center on campus. So like I didn't know a lot of these things. So one, like it's not enough to just have a policy and then your players not be aware that it even exists or that they're protected or that there's language in there that includes them. And then to some of the things that Schuyler's point of like the culture you create, especially in sports, or being on a student campus, you know, like the culture of the environment you're a part of. And culture and leadership can be shifted, particularly from the top down, right? And so with your coaches, I think it's so important to show vulnerability and making those mistakes. I had someone ask me today, and they were like really awkward, and they were like, I have to ask you, I feel really silly saying this, but like, what are your pronouns? And I was like that meant the freaking world to me. And it was like this cis guy who was like about to introduce me and doing this basketball thing. And he was like awkward and like, and I was just like, you don't even know the amount of like doing something that simple, how big that can feel to a person to just say like, wow, you asked. And I was like, I use all of them. So like none of them are wrong. Right. And so he used she and her. And I was like, but thank you. I felt seen. It wasn't just like assuming to use she and her because I play women's basketball. So then I'm she and herring me in the sports world. And then celebrating us, not just on Trans Day of Visibility, or not just when you're checking a box for Women's History Month, or don't just holler at me in February when it's Black History Month, like celebrate all of me all the time. And something that really is impactful for me when I was on campus was like seeing like the rainbow sticker, and now we have like the trans flag or the non-binary flag or the rainbow flag or the, you know, the rectangle, all the flags. Like I love everybody. Like you can't put those in enough places on campuses, particularly like you see that on a like administrator's door, you see that on a coach's door, you see that on your academic advisor's door, the little things like that that just give you signals. Like when you're a person who's marginalized by whatever identity, and all of us, like we're looking for community and belonging and safety. And so when you see those little things, you're like, oh, okay, like thank you. And that like little piece of sliver when you're walking through the world as this person who like doesn't fit in all the molds, it means the world. And I think those are the little things with culture that you could start to do that like shift the way people on your campus view things and the way people like us experience and feel like loved and seen and whole. And to Schuyler's point, like I'm so glad you brought that up, because I think this is the disconnect in sports, is like you perform better when you're a whole happy human being. Like in the business world, in the athletic world, as a child to a parent, as an administrator, as a whatever you may be, as a partner, when you can show up and be your whole fullest self. So particularly in the American context of productivity and capitalism, like it's horrible business actually to not support people, because you're going to get more out of them. Like, I hate all of that, even saying that, but you're going to get better product, better business, better performance out of people when they can be like whole and happy and have good mental health and not be thinking about this identity or this thing that's holding them back. And my college coach was like so good at doing that. I was actually out to her before I even came to Cal. And she used to say things like, I was out to her as a queer person. And that's the reason I went to Cal. And she used to say things like, you can bring your boyfriends or girlfriends to like the team dinner. And it's like something so simple like that, that wasn't like, oh, well, like, can she come? Or like, I knew like all of me was accepted to come and be a part of dinner at her house. And like those little things that make you perform and just be a better person, like they go a long way, and they just can't be understated with the impact. I don't know how we like measure them and give you a pie chart of it, but they go a long way.
I have to drop off, Erica. Sorry, I don't want to interrupt you, but you definitely go next. I have to drop off because it is 7:30 and I have a different event I have to go to. So thank you so much for having me here and listening to all my thoughts and partial rants. Layshia, I squeal every time I see a trans flag at every door. My partner knows this. I like pull her aside. I'm like, look, a trans flag. I always get so excited. So totally, I agree with that one. Thank you so much for having me, everybody. I'm just going to drop a link. That's where you can find me. I do answer all my emails as long as they're not spam or hate. So if you do want to get in touch with me, you can do so there. But thanks for putting us together. I really appreciated the space. And I hope you'll have a great evening. Take care. Bye.
Okay, first off, I just realized that my pronouns are not listed on this particular profile. I have multiple profiles, so I apologize for y'all. I will fix that immediately. On my other profiles, they're there, and so definitely called me out on that one. I really don't have a lot to add to that, because honestly, they both really said it. I think for me, it would be more from the standpoint of my teammates. Like I've said a few times already tonight, I have an incredible group of teammates and friends and people that have supported me. And the funny thing is how many times I've come out to teammates and it's just a moot point to them. They don't care. And it's like they do care from the standpoint of they're willing to stand up and say something on my behalf and back me, but from the standpoint of like, oh well, are you da 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 da, should you be playing football, should you be doing this, no. And one of the things that I noticed today, even when I was asking them to share this and to attend it, was how many of them that were like, oh my gosh, yes. And like, you know, it was showing up in their social media platforms. Of course, my, you know, owners and the team website and things like that, putting it out there on my behalf. And so I get so much support from them. But what I love is the fact that when we go to practice, when we have games later this year, it's just about us as a sisterhood, as a unit, and playing football together. And they don't worry about the rest of it. And so if they ask questions, then I will give them the answers and try to point them in the right direction. Because again, anytime that I answer those questions or share that, I will preference that with, please share this with family members, share this with your other friends, share this with people, because the point is, the more that we have the allies that are saying, yes, this and this and this, and I know this person, and they're doing that, then the more people will be like, oh yeah, they're just people. They're just living their lives. And to the point that Layshia said earlier, for me at work, after I came out and transitioned, I went from being probably one of the employees that might get fired to being one of the best at my job. And it's flat out because I'm happy with who I am, who I present myself at work, and I got more confidence in what I'm doing. So that in itself, when you have people that embrace you, make you feel welcome, and just treat you like you belong, your productivity, whether it's in sports or secular world, can be off the charts.
All right, that is the end of our discussion section. I believe this is the end for our discussion today. Like, thank y'all for all y'all's answers. Like, we greatly appreciate that. Like, give us a big insight on how on the experiences of trans athletes, and just there's still much more to be covered when it comes to the full protection and inclusion of transgender people in the sports world, and also just, you know, in general, like just trans people like deserve so much, but we are still in just a dark place, you know, like it's very difficult.
Thank you all so much. If folks have questions, feel free to send them to me or Dr. Selleck for our wonderful panel. This was amazing. The only thing better would have been to do it in person. And maybe we can do that one day. But yeah, I know. Hugs are so missed. So missed. I'm seeing lots of things in the chat about great conversation, hugs. You all talked about like everything. So I don't know if folks have questions, because you all really, really covered all kinds of things. I'll admit that my wife asked me to ask this question of you, Layshia. She said, can you ask about the WNBA and Black Lives Matter and tell them that they did a phenomenal job with that, and ask about what your thoughts are on Black Lives Matter? So I will ask that question about the WNBA and Black Lives Matter and how you feel about that.
I mean, I feel really good about it. Obviously, I feel like it's really—
I'm sure you do.
You know, it's really important to say that Black Lives Matter. It was really important to have it on the court. Like, we were pretty adamant with the league last year God, it feels so long ago, when we were heading into the season, the pandemic hit, we didn't know if we'd have a season, and then we were working with the league. And we had to get a lot of approval from like Nike and the sponsors and all the corporate of things you have to know. And like, are we putting Black Lives Matter, the corporation, on the floor, or is it the statement Black Lives Matter and the hashtag? And so there was some logistics there, but I remember just saying to the league over and over again, like, I want to see it every time I run up and down the court. Like, I want it to be on camera every time we see it pan across, that it's stated so boldly, and it should be on the courts, I think, again this year, although we'll be in 12 different markets. So I think it's technically up to every team to put it on the court if they want to or not. But I just don't think you can understate it. Obviously, the importance of saying Black Lives Matter and is because we know that they aren't valued in this country, and that's not the way we treat Black folks, from health disparities to like all the police violence, everything that we can name. And so I feel really good about it. I'm glad we got it on the court. Obviously, we highlighted the Say Her Name campaign as well, which was so important because, you know, we see people marching in droves for George Floyd, but we didn't see that for Breonna Taylor, and we don't see it for so many Black women. And so our league saw themselves in Breonna Taylor, who was freaking living in her house asleep, and you know, ended up murdered by police who came in with a no-knock warrant. And so the W just always tried to stand. We are a league of like quite literally intersectionality. We have like 70 to 80% Black people. We have quite a few queer people. You know, it's harder to measure like sexuality. You can't make people like do a survey. And quite a few women. We have foreign players. And so we live really at the margins and the intersections of a lot of different things that come together in sports. And so it was really important for us to make sure that we, you know, highlighted race and highlighted gender. We've always try to celebrate queer people in the most recent years. And then I'm hoping in the most recent year that like we can get behind these anti-trans bills and start to fight a lot more for trans women, especially because it's all being done instead in the name of like cis women, that like we're protecting women's sports, when that's not obviously really the reason behind it.
Thank you for responding to that. She's in the background going, I see a question in the chat now. I'll read it. It says, Coach Thompson, the former coach here at Georgetown, used to always say he resented being known as the first Black coach to win a championship because other Black coaches never had the proper opportunity. Do you feel the same way when people ask you, what does it mean to be the first trans person to accomplish XYZ? Or is it important for trans visibility? And the answer can be for both folks. The question, I guess, is for both folks.
That's interesting. I really hear the sentiment behind that. I actually have not thought about it from that perspective of like resenting the fact that you're the first because there should have been how many before you. And I know we know there have been trans people in sports, but like they might not have been out. There's people who are probably trans right now, right, that we don't know. I've been in the league this whole time, and it was like, like surprise, I've been here, like you didn't know. And so I really get that sentiment, and it actually makes a lot of sense. Like it's hitting me pretty deep right now. But I do think like I can hold both, like the sentiment of the resentment, that the fact that we've had to be the first, and we see it time and time again with things. I'm still like, wait, this was the first senator, this was the first trans person to serve in government, this was the first Indigenous woman. Like how are we still having all these firsts, which points to the progress like we haven't made and how much longer we still have to go. But from the visibility standpoint, I think I take a lot of humility and pride in it, that, you know, it was a risk to take to come out and talk about surgery, and to, you know, particularly in a binary world of sports. And so I know there's people before me, and I like always say like I stand on their shoulders, like the Polly Murrays of the world, the people in the world that like their history just does not get told. And to walk so boldly and visibly and like get our history told now in society, I think it makes ancestors like happy and proud, because they were living their best lives and fighting these oppression for years and years and years. And so now I think that we have the ability to do it with such visibility, if that's what you choose and it makes you feel good. I take a lot of pride in it.
As I say, I'm definitely not the first when it comes to trans women playing football, or the ones that have been through a lot to even be able to play football. For me, I guess really the only thing that I can say I was the first was Athlete Ally Athlete, or player ambassador as a trans women's tackle football player. And in that case, I would say I'm very, very proud to be able to be that person. And I really would like to see more, because I feel like I've been able to meet more trans women that play women's tackle football because of that platform. And I also feel like it's given me more of a voice. Like, clearly I haven't done this as much as you have, or as much as Schuyler has, because I still struggle sometimes with articulating thoughts. Sometimes my emotions get the most of me, but I think it's even more like right now becoming more emboldened to actually speak with emotion, but back that with fact. And right now, that's where I find myself, whether it's this panel or the podcast that I did the other day, is just like, so many times they just want you to, answer the question in a neat little box, give them a yes and no to question, but not really present that emotion. And so for that standpoint, I would be proud to be the first trans female athlete that's out doing that in the public eye and take whatever comes on, because I feel like it, leads to better opportunity. But like what you said, I think any trans female football player out there that might watch this or hear about this, and there's several of them, a lot of them might be afraid to to come out and say something. But I really hope it empowers them to speak up and force these leagues to take a closer look at how they're treating trans female athletes when it comes to women's tackle football.
Thank you so much. And Nathan, I misread the end of your question. You were saying the answer can be both things. But like I just said that. Any other questions from the audience?
Can I ask Layshia a question?
Sure, of course.
No.
And this might just be that I haven't been able to find it, but obviously with you, coming out as trans and getting the ball rolling and talking about how the WNBA is more, inclusive, is there something in the works, or is there something in the WNBA's policy that allows certain, like, do they require certain things when it comes to being able to compete as a trans woman? Like, I know what it is for football. Is there like a written policy? Is there something that people can see when it comes to WNBA that allows or encourages trans women to play? Sorry, I got to stop using the word allows.
Yeah, that's a hard one to break, because we know a lot of those barriers are. There actually isn't right now. And before I had come out about my surgery, I had a lot of conversations internally, and there was pushback from our union in a good way about not creating a policy, which my first flag was like, what? Policy? I want a policy to protect me. Like, I want to know I still have my job, I'm protected. But actually, it ended up being a really good thing, because when you create a policy, right, particularly around hormones, which is what so much of what this gets centered around, right? It's like, if I chop my boobs off, like, you can't kick me out of the league. Like, someone could have had a double mastectomy and moved on with their life. Like, you can't tell me if I can play or not with like breast. But the conversation becomes centered around hormones. And when you create a policy, I think the W's approach has been more to go case by case instead of create this very rigid policy that says, right, because what are we going to do? Gender test the whole league and say this person is on this range? Like, how do we really know what the average range of a woman is, or a female athlete, unless we gender tested everybody, which is like never something we want to advocate for. And so in that first way, I was like, we need a policy. Now I'm actually like, it's kind of good we don't, because it gives the opportunity to take it a case by case instance. And when I had come out, the W had put their statement out about like we accept Layshia and like encourage trans people. Like, it was a really great statement. I wish I had my Schuyler like quickness to drop the link in there on it. But I thought that was really important, because like you said, we have to tell trans people they belong. And it's only, a matter of time before we have an WNBA athlete who was born male, because let's be honest, this is all the conversation about, because we want to regulate women's bodies. We're not having as much debate about like, oh, was Layshia born and I could go play in the NBA? No one thinks I could compete anyway, because we don't think women can compete in men's sports, but we're so hyper worried about people who are born male competing in women's sports. And so it's actually been a really good thing that we don't have a policy, is weirdly to say that. I saw the NWSL just came out with the policy, and I think they followed a lot of the IOC, and I was like, that's good, but like, so does that mean you could only microdose? Like, there was ranges that they gave, and I think it's a dangerous game when you play the ranges, because I don't think we truly know everybody's range. We don't, the way we overestimate like testosterone and performance, when like, there's obviously people born with different levels of testosterone. And so I see some people, I'm like, we're doing the same lift. Like, how your muscles look bigger than mine right now? Like, that's not fair. Like, you're over 6 feet. That ain't fair. Like, I'm 5'9", barely 5'10". So in that way, it's actually been a really positive thing that the W hasn't, weirdly enough to say.
No, I don't think that's weird at all. In fact, I really wish more sports leagues would look at it that way. Because my personal story, you know, I've had to meet those qualifications, and I know what the pills that I've put in my body have done to me. I know what my abilities were prior to my transition when it came to what I could do athletically. Am I strong now? Absolutely. That's because I go to the gym, you know, but my endurance and the muscle mass that I lost when I started doing hormone therapy and all of that, like, it's so funny to sit there and watch, in particular, white cis males try to tell me what my body does on hormones. And to have them sit there and make, you know, I agree with what Schuyler said. I try not to read the comments. Sometimes I fall down that rabbit hole and then I have to jump right back out. But I mean, basically, it's one of those things where I think that's amazing, because I do believe that that would be a better approach. But at the same time, you know, how that leads to those particular individuals opening a conversation that could go to a place we don't want it to go. So it's awesome from the standpoint of a trans athlete going, heck yeah. But then unfortunately, the world we live in, that's where like something like that I doubt would ever work for women's tackle football. It's a more, you know, from the way that they look at it. And that's kind of the hardest thing about this sport, is that, you know, yes, I am bigger. I am 5'11", way over 230 pounds. But like, I got news for y'all. I got bigger because of my hormones. So like, and I'm not talking about like strong, I'm talking about bigger. So it's just, yeah, thank you for answering that. I wasn't sure if that would have put you on the spot or not. I just was kind of curious about it. So
yeah. And you look at our league, we have such a variety of body types. This is what Schuyler was saying earlier. It's just so ridiculous. Like, to one of your points, we have a cis person in our league. You have to take estrogen now. Like, your hormones you have to take put you at a disadvantage to the cis person who actually had maybe more testosterone or different hormones than you, that like now you've had to alter your body. It's like, that's actually not fair in terms of competition. And you look at our league and it's like, we have like players who are like 5'6", who like, I hate guarding because it's like, feels like they're on the ground, all the way up to players who are like 6'7", like Liz Cambage is like 6'7", 6'8", like 2 something, like she's huge. You have Skylar Diggins who's like 5'9" and like petite, and every like long gangly, like Stewie's wingspan, Brianna Stewart's wingspan is longer than LeBron's. Like, her arms, like they like hit the floor when she walks. So you have such a variety of body types in our league that are all types of women who are like assigned female at birth. I don't know how everyone identifies. I think we actually have a lot of gender expansion in our league that hasn't quite been like explored a lot. In particular, is like a Black queer league that has really been like criticized. And I think our bodies have been hyper masculinized, like Schuyler was talking about, because of our race. And so we have the BGs of the world. We have like just so many like beautiful body types in our league that it's just really sad that, you know, we get relegated to these kind of rigid, right, white supremacist like ideals of like what defines the woman, what defines a man, when we also know like we know more now. We know people are non-binary. We don't even talk about the level of like intersex people who are born and like, are they just not supposed to play sports? Like if it was Castor, if I was born a certain way, it's just like, sorry, you fit in the sport or you don't, you better like keep it pushing. So I just think we have to, I hope we start to have more, which is what the W has done, like productive conversations that stop saying like, pointing out what the problem is and talk about solutions and say like, look, we know now it's not this rigid, like even sex and the binary is not as rigid as we've portrayed it to be. And that's one of the really big misnomers, is that there's just two sexes and like, this is, you fit on this side or that side. And that's actually a lie. And so there's just such a long way to go with like debunking the education side of it, the myths, the dangerous, like gross, disgusting myths that we have to overcome and like shift culture to say like, yeah, competitive advantage is what makes like sports great. Sorry, that's why only like point whatever percentage of us make it to this level, because we're better than everybody else. So that's the point of sports. Like when LeBron like beats somebody on the court, they're like, yeah, he's so tough. And then we like beat somebody like, oh my gosh, she's so mean. Like, why is she bullying people on the court? Like she needs to play more like finesse. I'm sure you get that in football, in like a very physical contact sport. So it's just so deep rooted. I could go like on and on, and just gets, it makes me so frustrated.
Yeah, no, I agree. And honestly, my major injuries as far as sports took place in women's tackle football. These girls can ball. Absolutely can ball. So I actually was lucky enough to play in it was the Western Conference Hall of Fame game a couple years ago down in Vegas. It's where, you know, basically any female women's tackle football player can petition if they played, you know, they were rostered on a team, they could petition to be on this team. And then they only take like 40 of us. And I was chosen to do that. And it was such an eye-opening experience. And it's like proof, so much proof about what I said earlier, because I would, you know, meet these women. We had lunch, we did 2-a-days, we did all these great experiences. And they're like, oh, hey, you on social media, let's add you on Facebook, let's add you on Instagram. And then, oh, you're trans? Like literally, there were so many that didn't even know. And like literally I'd be like, yeah, is that an issue? Like, no, not at all, just didn't know. You know what I mean? It's like, so that's the whole point. Why does it matter? Mm-hmm. And they were kicking my butt. So I'm gonna put it out there. So many, you know, if you get a chance to ever go on like YouTube and watch women's tackle football, there's so many like videos, and just these women are incredible. And hopefully at some point they will get paid to play the game. I still think it's a long way out, but yeah.
So we have one last question for the both of you. It's from Amy. It says, I am wondering if both of you could speak a little about the division of sports by gender and what you think sports would look like in the future in regards to that division.
You want me to start?
Sure.
Well, one, like, we know sports exist on a binary, right? So male, female sports leagues, we have the NBA, we have the WNBA, we have MLB, softball, like you can go on and on and on. And we divide them from a pretty young age, right? Like you can do some co-ed youth sports, and it's always like the girls can play with the boys, but the boys don't play with the girls because we think they can't even compete on that side. And so it exists in a very binary fashion. And I think it's interesting, like people ask, like, do you think we should just have one league? And I don't think so today, in terms of like, the WNBA was designed because women are marginalized by gender, right? Which includes trans people, which includes non-binary people, which includes like all the genderqueer identities on the umbrella, the trans umbrella. And so because we haven't had opportunities, so in that way, I don't like to say the word behind, but I like to connect it to race in terms of like, we weren't given opportunities the same way like Black people are behind in terms of our wealth, in terms of our property, in terms of like, hello, all the years we couldn't own shit and we had to like, are trying to catch up now, like why we need reparations. And so in that same way, like when women weren't allowed to play sports, or women had to play 3-on-3 because they didn't think we could run past half court, like all the levels of marginalization that we've experienced as women, as people who are marginalized by gender, is why the W had to exist, so we could have opportunities to play. And so in that way, you can't just say like, boom, let's go to one league now, because right, we need to have and create the opportunities to play. And it starts at the youth level. Like you still see in terms of trans people, in terms of young girls, like the amount of participation, like you have to find and seek these girls out. It's not like a more as readily available like opportunities and investments that go. And this is starting, like we talked about the NCAA and their investment, like it starts at such a young level, like the lack of investment in youth sports for girls, and basketball and all sports. And now we see the attack on trans people. So I don't know if there's ever a point where there's one league or we catch up, but I think I love the fact that the W is now can be positioned and be known as, I think about the umbrella terms of like, we're technically a women's league, like the NBA in definition. I think any woman or man can participate in it, but the WNBA says it's a women's league, but I look at that as an umbrella term. And like, I obviously fit in that umbrella term because like I'm marginalized by gender. So I need opportunities to play in the same way someone who is a trans woman or a trans girl like needs opportunities to play. And so I'm really ever hesitant to say like abolish the W, which I know is not the question, but like create one league. I think the future is continuing to like point out the disparities and the reasons why it exists so we can keep giving and creating the opportunities.
I'm going to take that from a different angle. So a lot of what I've encountered when it comes to feedback about trans female participation in sports is exactly along those lines, where they talk about, you know, they should just group them by body types. They should group them by size. And honestly, the most frustrating thing about that is in the conversations that I've had that have actually taken place on my social media is it comes down to, they will first be like, oh, well, you shouldn't play, you shouldn't be able to do this. And then you're like, well, I did this, this, and this, and this is how I qualify, and they allow me to do this, and they do that. There's like, oh, well, maybe then in that case, we should just have everybody play together. And it's like, from a trans female perspective, that's like, okay, so once again, you're using this to say, I am not female. And that, I think, is the hardest thing for at least myself and my fellow trans sisters that play women's tackle football that have talked about this, and some other sports, is like, you're basically saying, no, you cannot compete with the girls, so we'll put you in a mix, or even worse, an all trans league. I'm sure you've heard about that too. And it's like, you know as well as I do, there's not enough trans athletes that would even work, that would ever even happen, because it's not the issue that everybody thinks it is. And so that's the frustrating part for me about that question. Is like, you know, I don't mind competing against boys, but I would rather, you know, I am female, I want to compete against women, I feel like I deserve to compete against women, and I'm with you. The female empowerment to me is more important than do I belong on a field with a man. It's doing my part to continue to do that. And I will agree with some of the comments that came in. Your game is definitely more technically sound. Y'all don't flop, which I can't stand that in the NBA. And just love watching y'all play, because you're all seriously good shooters. Like, wow. I just had to say that. Sorry, I had to throw that in there.